As 2020 comes to a close, America's adversaries are stepping up their activities and their attacks against American interests. From Russian hacking to Iranian attacks in Iraq and, of course, China's economic and military aggression. Let's talk the latest and what to expect in 2021 with Fred Fleitz. He's a former chief of staff to the National Security Council, and we're also joined, and he's also a former CIA analyst, and Lieutenant Colonel James Carafano. He is the vice president of the Heritage Foundation for National Security and Foreign Policy. Fred, I'm going to start with you. There seems to be some disagreement on how to classify, how to handle this Russian cyber attack. The president is pointing the finger at China. National security agencies, the Secretary of State and others are convinced that it was Russia. Is there a disconnect? And if so, why?
It's good to be here. Jim and Tom, Merry Christmas. It looks like it was Russia, what experts are saying, but most of them have no evidence of this. The president's saying it could have been China. China has a very robust military cyber capability, so I can't rule that out. But what we're seeing here is a supply chain hack, a firm that provided patches to software worldwide that infected 16,000 computers and created a backdoor for these nation-state hackers. It's really frightening because, our computers are being patched without our knowledge every day. Microsoft, Adobe, and if hackers could get into that software, they could steal all kinds of material and we wouldn't know it.
James, we tend to silo these powers, right? We tend to silo Russia, and we talk about Russia, or we talk about China or Iran. But isn't it time that our government and our politicians and really all Americans start appreciating that these countries are working as a communist or authoritarian bloc, and they are working together, and they are going to be stronger the closer that they get?
What Fred said, because that's a really important point, which is for this particular hack, it's much more that we pay attention to how it was done than who did it. So SolarWinds was a private company that was providing services for a whole bunch of other companies, public and private. And what the hackers did is they got into SolarWinds and they used that as a pathway into all these different other companies. That's a new attack vector that we haven't seen before. And now it's one that we're going to have to be careful of, regardless of who the source is, because other people will imitate that if we don't close that door. And as you point out, this is the nature of modern threats. The reality is there are a number of actors in the world, North Korea, China, Iran, Russia, who only see their place in the world protected or advanced by diminishing the United States. And we have to take them all seriously. We can't pick and choose which enemy we want to take care of. We have to pay attention to all of them. Sometimes they collaborate. Sometimes they also compete with each other. So we have to be smart about how we're doing this and doing things that are hurting them and protecting us. That has to be our strategy going forward.
Fred, are we a little behind the eight ball here? It does seem that this hack is probably the most ambitious that we've ever seen. And we know that this has been a threat. It's certainly been a concern. But are we putting enough resources towards cyber warfare and cyber espionage and countering that?
This is really a crucial question. We're spending billions of dollars to defend against cyber hacks from multiple intelligence agencies, the ODNI, CIA, DHS, thousands of employees. What were they doing? How did this go on? And the hack broke into government computers, and the U.S. government didn't detect it. A private company that was broken into detected it. This really shows gross incompetence by the United States government, by the U.S. intelligence community. This was a major intelligence failure, and heads should roll for this. There has to be major changes.
Fred, the anniversary of the killing of Iranian General Qasem Soleimani is just a couple of weeks away. Iran is believed to be responsible for firing missiles at the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad. Certainly wouldn't surprise anybody that would be the case. Do you think that we're going to see a higher profile attack around the time of that anniversary?
I think it's possible, and I believe the Iranians believe that they can use acts of violence to force President Trump's hand to completely withdraw from Iran before the end of his term. He's not going to do that. He has drawn down our forces in Iran. He's not going to be blackmailed into doing something that is not in the interest of our country. And I also think the Iranians are preparing to cash in on the huge acts of appeasement that's coming from a Biden administration. I'm very concerned what's going to happen after Biden takes office.
Well, look, Obama literally dumped, hundreds of millions of dollars in cash on the tarmac in Tehran. So who can blame them? Jim, I personally believe our China strategy has been incredibly naive over the last 20 years. There are increasing calls for us to decouple from China, primarily from Republicans. What does that strategy look like in the near term as we move into 2021?
Well, the big unknown here is what would the strategy of an incoming Biden team is, and we have no clue to that. I mean, so the Iran thing is a good example where they said, well, we'll just go back to the Iran deal, which completely makes no sense. It benefits no one but Iran. And to Fred's point, they're getting more belligerent. So if you appease them as they get more belligerent, that just makes them more aggressive. And nobody's really paying attention to North Korea, because if they give a sweetheart deal to Iran, the North Koreans will read that and they will say, well, we'll be belligerent, and they'll fold like a deck of cards in front of us too. Mm-hmm. And that's how the Chinese will read it as well. Look, the great challenge here is we don't really know a lot about a Biden foreign policy because it wasn't discussed much on the campaign trail. All we know is that we have an administration which is filled with Obama people. And if we have Obama 3.0, the one thing we know for sure is they did a terrible job of dealing with China. They had no notion how to manage Chinese aggressive behaviors. And so I think there's this massive open question is, how is Washington going to lead us? Because whether you want to decouple or do selective engagement or whatever, if you don't have an administration that shows a strong hand against China, then essentially China, they're a very aggressive actor with a lot of cards to play. Right. They'll run rings around a new administration.
Fred, we're going to have a change in administration in Washington. Allies and enemies are watching very closely. To Jim's point, what are your predictions for 2021 in foreign policy? And I have to do this to you. I got to give you about 45 seconds.
I worry we're going to give away our sovereignty to the UN and to Europe. And it's going to give Russia and China a veto over our foreign policy. And we're going to make the world much less stable than it is today.
All right. Fred Fleitz and Jim Carafano, Merry Christmas to you and Happy New Year. Appreciate your insight.
Good to be here. Thank you.